My sister, Lila, has been struggling with her mental health, Evelyn Margaret Hensley announced, her voice slicing through the hum of the Maritime Glow Festival. It was October 2024, and the Fall River waterfront shimmered under a canopy of hand-blown glass lanterns, each a creation from our family's Hensley Glassworks. The cobblestone streets of this old Massachusetts port town glowed with light, the air thick with sea salt and the sweet char of caramelized apples. Locals and tourists wove through stalls, their eyes catching on glass bottles etched with schooners and lighthouses, tributes to Fall River's maritime soul. At 36, I, Lila Beatrice Hensley, stood beside the festival's centerpiece, the shattered beacon, a 3-foot-tall glass sculpture crafted by my grandmother Beatrice. Its deliberate cracks refracted the lantern glow, making it pulse. Like a fractured star, a symbol of our family's legacy, fragile yet unyielding, Evelyn, my sister, stood on the main stage, her silk dress catching the light like one of our finest glassworks. At 39, she was a corporate consultant from Boston, her polished presence a stark contrast to my ink-stained fingers and quiet life as a journalist for the Fall River Chronicle. The crowd hushed as she continued, her words smooth but edged with steel. As a family, we've decided she can no longer manage Hensley Glassworks. She'll get nothing, she added, a smirk curling her lips, until she's well again. The words landed like a hammer on glass, shattering the festive air. Gasps rippled through the crowd, their whispers ablaze against my skin. My notebook, filled with sketches of glass designs and quotes for a Chronicle feature, slipped in my sweating palms. Evelyn's accusation wasn't just a lie, it was a public execution of my reputation, delivered before Fall River's tight-knit community, where trust was as delicate as the bottles we crafted. 3 weeks ago, I'd overheard Evelyn in the Glassworks showroom, her voice low as she handed a thick envelope to Dr. Harold Vance, a local psychiatrist with a reputation as slippery as the Taunton River's currents. Make it convincing, she'd whispered. I'd thought it was about a Boston client, some deal gone sour. Now, her smirk told me the truth, she'd paid to forge a diagnosis, to paint me as unfit, to strip me of my legacy. My eyes drifted to the shattered beacon, its etched initials EC glinting in the lantern light. A secret lay there, I was certain, one Evelyn would ruin me to keep buried. The crowd's pitying stares burned, their murmurs a chorus of doubt. I'd spent years writing about Fall River's heart, its shipyards, its artisans, its history, only to be cast as its broken daughter. My mother, the woman who'd taught me to chase stories with a pencil and grit, stood near the stage, her face a mask of concern. My father, always her silent shadow, avoided my gaze, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Why would Evelyn, who'd traded Fall River for Boston's skyscrapers, go to such lengths to destroy me? The Glassworks wasn't just a business, it was our family's anchor, a century-old craft tying us to this town's maritime roots. Evelyn had been pushing to sell it for a luxury hotel, erasing our legacy, while I'd argued to preserve it as an artisan hub. But this wasn't just about land or money. The DC on the shattered beacon was a clue, a thread I'd pull until her lies unraveled. I forced my breath to steady, my journalist's instinct sharpening. Evelyn's smirk was a tell, too calculated, too triumphant. She wasn't just after the Glassworks, she was hiding something older, deeper. I remembered a moment from 20 years ago, when I was 16, rummaging through the Glassworks' dusty office. I'd found a letter in Beatrice's elegant script, addressed to me, Lila, you are the soul of the Glassworks. This legacy is yours. I'd shown it to my mother, expecting pride. Instead, her face had paled, and she'd snatched it away. Beatrice was fanciful, she'd snapped, her hands trembling. The letter vanished, but its words burned in me. Was it tied to EC? Why had my mother, who framed Evelyn's degrees on our walls, buried my inheritance? The festival's lights mocked the darkness settling in my chest. Clara Thompson, my childhood friend and a council member, stood near the stage, her eyes darting away when I looked at her. We'd once sworn to have each other's backs, but her silence tonight felt like a betrayal. Was she complicit, or just another pawn in Evelyn's game? I scribbled a question in my notebook, my pen steady despite the tremor in my heart. What's worth betraying your own sister? The crowd's whispers grew louder, their pity a weight I refused to carry. I straightened, my resolve hardening like molten glass in a cooling mold. Evelyn thought she'd broken me, but she'd only lit a fuse. As the festival's music swelled, I caught a glint off the shattered beacon, its cracks seeming to pulse with secrets. Evelyn's envelope to Dr. Vance, her whispered command, they were pieces of a puzzle I'd solve. My mother's silence, my father's averted eyes, they were part of this too. I closed my notebook, the weight of their betrayal settling into a cold, sharp clarity. I wasn't the fragile one here. I'd spent years uncovering truths for the Chronicle, now I'd uncover my own. The festival continued around me, oblivious to the war declared on that stage. Evelyn's smirk had drawn the battle lines, but I'd fight back, not with tears, but with the precision of a journalist who knew how to dig.my gaze locked on the shattered beacon, its EC. Etching a quiet challenge. Why was Evelyn so desperate to control the glassworks? The answer lay in that sculpture, in the letter my mother hid, in the initials I didn't yet understand. I wouldn't scream or collapse, not here, not now. Instead, I met Evelyn's gaze, my own eyes narrowing, a silent vow: you've started this, but I'll finish it. If you've ever been betrayed by those you trusted most, what would you do to take back what's yours? Subscribe to our channel to follow my fight for truth, to see how far a sister's lie can shatter, and how I'll rebuild. Evelyn's smirk lingered in my mind, a sharp splinter I couldn't dislodge. The Maritime Glow Festival's lights had dimmed, but the weight of her words, "You'll get nothing," pressed heavier than the crowd's pitying stares. I stood in the Hensley Glassworks office, the air thick with dust and the faint tang of molten glass from decades past. My notebook lay open on the desk, its pages a map of my unraveling life, sketches of the shattered beacon, questions about EC, and now, a new urgency to uncover why my sister wanted me erased. The Glassworks wasn't just a business, it was our family's heart, a century-old craft tying us to Fall River's maritime soul. Evelyn's plan to sell it for a luxury hotel was a betrayal, but her lie about my sanity was a declaration of war. I traced my fingers over a ledger from 1965, its leather cover cracked like the glass we shaped. 20 years ago, when I was 16, I'd found a letter here, tucked inside a similar ledger. My grandmother Beatrice's elegant script had promised me the Glassworks: "Lila, you are the soul of this place. This legacy is yours." I'd run to my mother, the woman who'd taught me to chase truth with a pencil, expecting her pride. Instead, her face had hardened, her hand snatching the letter. Beatrice was fanciful, she'd snapped, her voice trembling as if I'd unearthed a ghost. The letter vanished, and with it, any hope of her explaining why. Now, standing in the same office, I wondered, was that letter tied to the EC etched on the shattered beacon? Did my mother hide it to protect Evelyn's claim? The office was a time capsule, shelves of old invoices, glass molds, and sketches of bottles that once lit Fall River's ships. I pulled another ledger, its pages yellowed but intact. A receipt slipped out, dated 1965, for a custom glass frame. Ordered by Beatrice, inscribed with EC. My breath caught. The frame matched the one I'd seen in the Fall River Historical Society, holding a photo of Beatrice with a man, both smiling by the glassworks furnace. The receipt noted payment to a local artisan, Arthur Gibbs, a name I knew from childhood stories. Why had my mother, who'd framed Evelyn's every achievement, buried this? I scribbled in my notebook. What did she fear I'd find? Evelyn's accusation at the festival wasn't just about control, it was personal, a blade aimed at my place in this family. Growing up, she was the golden child, her valedictorian plaques gleaming on our walls while my chronicle bylines were tucked in drawers. I stayed in Fall River, writing stories of shipyards and artisans, while Evelyn conquered Boston's boardrooms. When she returned last year, her questions about the Glassworks land value raised my hackles. I'd argued to keep it an artisan hub, but her festival speech turned my voice to ash. Now, the town council, swayed by her charm, was considering her hotel proposal. My father, the man who stayed silent, had patted my shoulder after the festival. His pity worse than scorn. "Rest, Lila," he'd said, as if I were the fragile one. I closed the ledger, my resolve hardening like glass in a cooling mold. Evelyn's lie wasn't impulsive, it was calculated, built on something my mother knew. I remembered a childhood moment, sitting with my mother at the Chronicle office, her hands guiding mine to write my first article. She'd smiled then, proud of my curiosity. Now, her silence at the festival felt like a second betrayal. I slipped the receipt into my pocket, its edges worn but heavy with promise. If Beatrice had left me the Glassworks, why had my mother hidden it? Was she protecting Evelyn, or something deeper? The Glassworks showroom loomed outside the office, its shelves lined with bottles and ornaments, each a piece of our history. I paused by the shattered beacon, its cracks catching the dim light. The EC etching was no coincidence, it was a message, one my sister wanted buried. I'd overheard her 3 weeks ago, passing that envelope to Dr. Harold Vance in this very room. "Make it convincing," she'd said. I'd thought it was a business deal, but now I saw it for what it was, a plot to discredit me, to ensure I'd lose the Glassworks. My mother's role was murkier, her silence, her trembling hands when I'd shown her Beatrice's letter. What hold did Evelyn have over her? I stepped outside, the night air sharp with salt from the Taunton River. Clara Thompson, my childhood friend, had been at the festival, her eyes avoiding mine as Evelyn spoke. Now a council member, Clara had once promised we'd always stand together. Her silence stung, but it also sparked suspicion. Was she bought by Evelyn's promises, or hiding her own guilt? I jotted another question in my notebook. Why would a friend turn away when you need her most? The Glassworks furnace room glowed faintly across the yard, its heat a reminder of the fire I'd need to fight back. Evelyn thought she'd silenced me, but she'd only sharpened my focus. My phone buzzed, a voicemail from my father, his voice heavy. "See Dr. Vance, Lila. It's for your own good." I deleted it, my fingers steady. Dr. Vance's name was another thread, tied to Evelyn's envelope and her lie. I'd spent years at the Chronicle chasing stories, reading people's tells, a glance too long, a pause too heavy. Evelyn's smirk was her mistake, it told me she feared something I could uncover. My mother's panic over that letter, my father's passive compliance, they were pieces of a puzzle I'd solve, not as their daughter, but as a journalist who knew how to dig. I returned to the shattered beacon, its glow a quiet challenge. The receipt, the letter, the initials, they were clues to a secret my family buried. Evelyn's plan to sell the Glassworks was only the surface, something deeper drove her to brand me insane. I wouldn't scream or collapse, not now, not ever. Instead, I closed my notebook, my resolve cold and sharp. Evelyn had drawn the battle lines, but I'd fight with precision, not rage. The receipt in my pocket burned like a coal, its faded ink tying the shattered beacon to a name, Edward Callahan. Evelyn's public strike at the Maritime Glow Festival had left me reeling, her lie about my sanity echoing in the whispers of Fall River's tight-knit community. My mother's betrayal, hiding Beatrice's letter all those years ago, cut deeper, but the EC etched on that glass sculpture was a lifeline. I needed answers, and the Fall River Historical Society, with its moldering archives, was my next step. The old brick building loomed in the pre-dawn quiet, its windows dark as I slipped inside with a key I'd borrowed from a Chronicle contact. The air smelled of aged paper and secrets, and I moved quickly, my flashlight cutting through the gloom to a corner where Glassworks records were stored. Rows of boxes lined the shelves, their labels faded but legible, invoices, sketches, deeds. I pulled one marked, Hensley Glassworks, 1960 to 1970, my hand steady despite the pulse in my throat. Inside, I found a glass-blown frame, its delicate curves holding a photograph of my grandmother Beatrice, her arm around a man I didn't recognize. They stood by the Glassworks furnace, her smile warm, his proud. The frame's base was etched with EC 1965, matching the receipt I'd found. My breath caught, this was no coincidence. I set the frame on a table, my journalist's tools, a magnifying glass and UV light, revealing faint scratches where a name had been sanded off. Hours of careful work restored it, Edward Callahan. The name hit like a wave breaking on Fall River's shore. Edward Callahan wasn't just a name, he was a ghost my family had erased. Was he a partner in the Glassworks, a co-owner my mother hid to secure Evelyn's claim? The letter Beatrice wrote me, promising the Glassworks, flashed in my mind, my mother's panic when I'd shown it to her at 16. She'd known about Edward, I was sure, and her silence at the festival confirmed it. But why? I flipped through the box, finding a ledger entry noting Edward as a consultant, paid for glass designs in 1965. A consultant? Beatrice didn't need consultants, she was the master artisan. This was a cover, a way to tie him to the Glassworks. Without naming him my father, the man who stayed silent, had been at the festival, his pitying pat on my shoulder a sting I couldn't shake. "Rest, Lila," he'd said, as if I were a cracked bottle to be shelved. Now, I saw his silence differently, not just passivity, but complicity. He'd stood by my mother's side, letting Evelyn's lie spread like wildfire. I scribbled in my notebook, why would a father let his daughter be broken? The question burned, but another figure haunted me, Clara Thompson, my childhood friend, now a council member. She'd stood near the stage during Evelyn's speech, her eyes avoiding mine. We'd shared secrets as girls, promising to stand together. Her silence felt like a second blade, but her nervous glance suggested doubt. Was she bought, or trapped? The Historical Society's clock ticked, each second a reminder of the town council's looming vote on Evelyn's hotel proposal. Her lie had swayed them, painting me as unfit to steward the Glassworks. I needed proof, not just of Edward, but of my mother's role in burying him. I sifted through more papers, my fingers brushing a sealed envelope, its wax stamp bearing Beatrice's initials. Inside was a sketch of the shattered beacon, annotated in her hand, for Edward, my heart's keeper. My chest tightened. Edward wasn't just a consultant, he was family, someone Beatrice cherished. Why had my mother, who'd taught me to write with courage, worked so hard to erase him? I traced the sketch, its cracks deliberate, like the ones in the sculpture. They weren't flaws, they were a message, hiding a truth my family feared. Then I found it, a notarized note, tucked in the envelope's fold, listing Edward Callahan as co-owner of the Glassworks land, dated 1965. My mother's jealousy, her fierce protection of Evelyn, clicked into place. She'd hidden Edward to ensure Evelyn, her golden child, inherited everything. The letter Beatrice wrote me wasn't just a promise, it was a challenge to this lie. Evelyn's festival speech, her payment to Dr. Vance, was her way of finishing what my mother started, erasing me, like she'd erased Edward. I slipped the note into my pocket, its weight heavier than the receipt. This wasn't just about the Glassworks, it was about a family's shame, buried in glass and ink. I stepped outside, the dawn breaking over Fall River's waterfront. The Taunton River glinted, its surface calm but treacherous, like Evelyn's charm. Clara's avoidance at the festival gnawed at me. I'd seen her fidget, her hands twisting. As Evelyn spoke, she knew something, maybe not about Edward, but about Evelyn's plans. I'd confront her, but not yet. My mother's role was the deeper wound. The woman who'd celebrated my first byline had stood silent as Evelyn branded me insane. Why? Was it guilt, fear, or something colder? I jotted another question in my notebook. What makes a mother choose one daughter over another? Back at the Glassworks, I stood before the shattered beacon, its cracks glowing faintly in the morning light. The EC etching was no accident, it was Beatrice's defiance, a truth she'd preserved in glass. Evelyn's lie, my mother's silence, my father's passivity, they were all part of a web I'd tear apart. I wouldn't scream or falter. My journalist's instincts, honed by years of chasing stories, would guide me. Evelyn thought she'd won, but she'd underestimated me. Edward Callahan's name, etched in glass and ink, was a secret my family buried, but it wasn't the only one. The notarized note from the Historical Society, tucked in my pocket beside the receipt, confirmed he was a co-owner of Hensley Glassworks. My mother's jealousy, her efforts to erase him for Evelyn's sake, was a wound that pulsed with every step I took toward the Fall River Chronicle office. Evelyn's lie at the Maritime Glow Festival had branded me unstable, but the real instability was this family's web of deceit. I needed more than old papers to fight back. I needed evidence that could stand in court, something to prove my sister's manipulation ran deeper than a paid-off doctor. The Chronicle office was quiet, its presses silent in the early morning. My desk, cluttered with notes on Glassworks history and festival coverage, was my war room. I sifted through a box of old medical records I'd requested from a contact at Fall River General, a favor called in from years of reporting favors. The records were for routine checkups at the Glassworks, standard for artisans exposed to silica dust. One folder, labeled Hensley Family, 2023, caught my eye. Inside was a prescription slip, its edges creased, bearing my mother's signature. It authorized sedatives for me, medication I'd never taken, dated a month before Evelyn's festival speech. My heart thudded. The woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to question everything, had forged this to bolster Evelyn's lie. Why? To protect the family's name, or something more personal? I leaned back, the slip trembling in my hand. My mother's handwriting, usually elegant, was hurried here, the ink smudged as if written in haste. This wasn't just compliance, it was desperation. She'd always framed Evelyn's achievements, her Boston triumphs, while my bylines were tucked away. Was this her way of ensuring Evelyn's control, fearing the Glassworks legacy would tarnish her golden child's shine? I scribbled in my notebook, what makes a mother forge a lie against her own daughter? The question burned, but another hit harder, Evelyn's next move. She'd already swayed the town council toward her hotel plan, painting me as unfit. This prescription was her insurance, a way to lock me out. Then, a knock at the office door jolted me. Clara Thompson, my childhood friend, stood there, her council member badge glinting under the fluorescent light. Her eyes, once warm with shared secrets, were shadowed with guilt. Lila, we need to talk, she said, her voice low. I gestured to a chair, my gaze steady, hiding the sting of her festival silence. Clara fidgeted, her fingers twisting a ring. Evelyn came to me last week, she admitted. She offered me a stake in the hotel deal if I backed her. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. My stomach churned. Clara, who'd braided my hair at 12, had stood by as Evelyn smeared me. But her confession wasn't remorse, it was fear. She's filing a defamation suit against you, Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. For your Chronicle blog post calling her out. The room tilted. My post, a brief editorial questioning Evelyn's motives after the festival, had been careful, factual, but sharp. I'd written it to rally support, to keep the Glassworks an artisan hub. Now, Evelyn was turning it against me, threatening my career to silence my fight. This wasn't just about the Glassworks, it was about crushing me entirely. Clara's eyes darted to the prescription slip on my desk. What's that? She asked, her voice tight. I slid it toward her, watching her face pale. Your mother signed this? She asked, disbelief cracking her composure. I nodded, my silence ablaze. Clara knew something, her nervous glance at the festival, her hesitation now, told me she was caught in Evelyn's web, but not willingly. I stood, pacing to the window overlooking Fall River's waterfront. The Taunton River glinted, its calm surface hiding treacherous currents, like Evelyn's charm. My father, the man who stayed silent, had urged me to see Dr. Vance, his voicemail a plea to comply. Now, I saw his passivity as another layer of betrayal, enabling my mother's forgery. But Clara's confession was a crack in their armor. Why tell me now? I asked, turning to her. She swallowed, her hands clasped tight. Because I saw your mother with Evelyn last night, at the Glassworks. They were arguing about someone named Edward. My pulse quickened. Edward Callahan, the ghost my mother erased, was unraveling their lies faster than I'd hoped. I pocketed the prescription slip, its weight heavier than the notarized note. Evelyn's defamation suit was a desperate move, proof she feared what I'd uncover. My mother's signature on that slip wasn't just complicity, it was a shield for Evelyn, built on years of favoritism. I remembered summers at the Glassworks, my mother praising Evelyn's sketches while dismissing mine. She'd wanted Evelyn to shine, even if it meant dimming me. But why Edward? Why hide a co-owner, a man Beatrice called my heart's keeper? I needed to find him, or at least someone who knew him, before Evelyn's suit buried me. Clara stood, her eyes pleading. I'll help you, Lila, but you have to move fast. Evelyn's meeting the council tomorrow. I nodded, my resolve cold. As the Glassworks furnace at rest. Clara's guilt was my leverage, but I wouldn't trust her fully, not yet. I'd spent years at the Chronicle, reading people's tells, a pause too long, a glance too sharp. Evelyn's suit was her tell, a sign she was scrambling. My mother's forgery was another, tying her to Evelyn's plot. I'd confront them. But not with rage, with evidence, like the journalist I was. I returned to my desk, the shattered beacon's image in my notebook staring back. Its cracks hid more than a D-chuck, they hid a family's shame. Evelyn's lie, my mother's forgery, my father's silence, they were all threads in a web I'd tear apart. The prescription slip with my mother's forged signature was a dagger, but Evelyn's defamation suit was a noose tightening around my career. Clara's confession, that she'd wavered under Evelyn's bribe, lit a fire under me. Edward Callahan's name, uncovered in the Historical Society's archives, was no longer just a clue, it was a weapon. I needed someone who knew him, someone who could confirm he was my grandmother Beatrice's son, hidden to secure Evelyn's claim to Hensley Glassworks. Arthur Gibbs, the artisan named on the 1965 receipt, was my next lead. His name had surfaced in Beatrice's sketch of the shattered beacon, and I remembered his weathered hands shaping glass when I was a child, his stories of Beatrice's genius. Filling the workshop with warmth. I found Arthur in a small cottage on the outskirts of Fall River, its yard cluttered with cracked glass bottles and rusted tools. The air smelled of salt and pine, the Taunton River a faint murmur beyond the trees. Arthur, now in his 70s, opened the door, his eyes sharp despite the years. Lila Hensley, he said, his voice gravelly but warm, you look like Beatrice. I smiled tightly, the weight of the notarized note and prescription slip heavy in my bag. I need to talk about Edward Callahan, I said, watching his face. His jaw tightened, and he gestured me inside, the room dim with shelves of glassworks, some Beatrice's, some his own. Arthur sat across from me, his hands folded like they still held a glassblower's pipe. Edward was Beatrice's son, he said, his voice low, as if the walls might betray him. Born out of wedlock in 1948, raised in secret. She loved him, but your family, your mother especially, wanted him gone. My chest tightened. Beatrice's note, calling Edward my heart's keeper, wasn't just sentiment, it was a mother's vow. Arthur leaned forward, his eyes haunted. Beatrice made him co-owner in '65, but your mother and her kin pressured her to hide it. They threatened to shun her, to ruin the Glassworks name if Edward's story came out. I scribbled in my notebook, why would a family erase their own blood? The question burned, tying my mother's forgery to a deeper shame. I showed Arthur the notarized note, its faded ink naming Edward as co-owner. His fingers traced the paper, trembling. This is Beatrice's hand, he said. She hid it in the shattered beacon, hoping someone like you would find it. My pulse quickened, Beatrice had planned for this, for me. But Arthur's next words hit harder. Evelyn came to me last month, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. She offered me money to stay quiet about Edward. When I refused, she threatened to burn the Glassworks down. My breath caught. Evelyn's defamation suit wasn't just about silencing me, it was about erasing every trace of Edward, even if it meant destroying our family's legacy. The room felt smaller, the air thick with betrayal. My mother's forged prescription, my father's silent compliance, Clara's wavering loyalty, they were all pieces of Evelyn's game. Arthur's eyes met mine, steady but pained. I kept quiet back then, Lila. Beatrice begged me to, for Edward's safety. But I won't now. His defiance sparked something in me, a cold resolve forged in the same fire as Beatrice's glass. Evelyn's threat to destroy the glassworks wasn't just a bluff, it was her desperation showing. She knew Edward's claim could unravel her hotel deal, her lies, her control. I stood, pacing to a window overlooking Arthur's cluttered yard. The glassworks was more than land or legacy, it was Beatrice's heart, and mine. My mother's role stung deepest. The woman who'd taught me to chase truth had buried it, forging my name on a prescription to protect Evelyn's shine. My father, the man who stayed silent, had enabled it, his rest, Lila, a coward's plea. Even Clara, my childhood friend, had faltered, her counsel badge a thin shield for her guilt. But Arthur's confession was a turning point. He'd known Beatrice's secret, and now he was my ally, a voice Evelyn couldn't silence. I turned back to Arthur, my voice steady. Will you testify? He nodded, his jaw set. For Beatrice, and for you. I pulled out my notebook, sketching a plan. Helen Reed, a lawyer I'd met through Chronicle stories, would need this, Arthur's testimony, the notarized note, the prescription slip. Evelyn's suit was a trap, but I'd turn it against her. Her threat to burn the glassworks was a line she'd crossed, a tell of her fear. I'd spent years reading people's pauses, their glances, their lies. Evelyn's desperation was my opening. Outside, the river's murmur echoed my resolve. The shattered beacon's cracks weren't flaws, they were Beatrice's defiance, hiding Edward's truth. Evelyn thought she could bury me like she buried him, but she'd miscalculated. My mother's forgery, my father's silence, Clara's guilt, they were threads I'd weave into her undoing. I wouldn't scream or break. I'd fight like a journalist, with evidence and precision, until Evelyn's lies shattered. Arthur Gibbs' promise to testify was a spark in the dark, but Evelyn's threat to burn Hensley Glassworks loomed like a storm over Fall River's waterfront. Her defamation suit against me, paired with my mother's forged prescription, tightened the noose, but Arthur's confirmation of Edward Callahan as Beatrice's son gave me a blade to cut through. I needed more, proof that Evelyn knew about Edward and tried to bury him. Clara Thompson, my childhood friend, was the key. Her guilty confession at the Chronicle office hinted at a deeper role, and her mention of Evelyn arguing with my mother about Edward set my instincts ablaze. I arranged to meet Clara at the Fall River Maritime Museum, a place where our shared past might loosen her tongue. The museum's dim hall smelled of polished wood and sea salt, its walls lined with ship models and glass bottles from the glassworks. Early days. Clara stood by a display of maritime lanterns, her council badge glinting under the low light. Her hands twisted nervously, betraying the composure she wore like armor. I messed up, Lila, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn paid me to push the hotel deal through the council. I took the money. My stomach churned, but I kept my face still, a journalist's mask honed over years. Clara's betrayal stung, but her guilt was my leverage. What else? I asked, my voice cold. She hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from her bag, a contract, its edges crisp, dated 2 months ago. It promised her a stake in Evelyn's hotel project, but one clause stopped me cold, Evelyn's signature, acknowledging Edward Callahan's claim to the glassworks land. My breath caught. This wasn't just a bribe, it was proof Evelyn knew about Edward and worked to erase him, just as she'd tried to erase me. I found this in Evelyn's office at the glassworks, Clara said, her eyes darting to the museum's shadows. She didn't know I kept a copy. I scanned the contract, its legal jargon a maze, but the intent was clear. Evelyn had planned to sell the glassworks, knowing Edward's claim could stop her. Then Clara's voice dropped lower. There's more. Evelyn tried to destroy the shattered beacon last week. I saw her in the workshop, prying at its base with a chisel, muttering about a hidden paper. My pulse raced. Beatrice's deed chuck, tucked inside the sculpture, was what Evelyn feared, a document that could unravel her lies. The museum's lanterns cast fractured light, mirroring the cracks in the shattered beacon. Clara's confession shifted everything. She'd been bought, yes, but her coming forward now was a crack in Evelyn's armor. I remembered Clara at 10, swearing we'd always have each other's backs. Her betrayal hurt, but her fear of Evelyn's wrath was stronger. Will you testify? I asked, my gaze locking on hers. She nodded, her jaw tight. I owe you that, Lila. And Beatrice. I slipped the contract into my bag, its weight heavier than the notarized note or the forged prescription. This was the key to exposing Evelyn's desperation, her attempt to destroy Beatrice's legacy to secure her own. My mother's role gnawed at me. The woman who'd raised me, who'd celebrated my first byline, had forged a prescription to brand me unstable. Her argument with Evelyn, overheard by Clara, suggested she knew about Edward too. Why protect Evelyn at such a cost? My father, the man who stayed silent, had enabled it, his rest, Lila, a passive betrayal. Their complicity was a wound. But Clara's contract was a weapon. I needed Helen Reed, my lawyer, to wield it in court. Evelyn's suit against me was a distraction, but her attempt to destroy the shattered beacon was a confession of guilt, one I'd used to turn the tide. I stepped outside, the Taunton River's chill biting through my coat. The museum's lanterns glowed behind me, a reminder of the Glassworks' heart. Evelyn's plan wasn't just about money, it was about control, about erasing anyone who threatened her vision. My mother's favoritism, my father's silence, Clara's wavering, they were all threads in her web. But Clara's testimony, backed by this contract, could unravel it. I scribbled in my notebook, "What makes a friend betray you, then choose to make it right?" The question lingered, but Evelyn's chisel marks on the shattered beacon were the real answer. She'd cracked the glass, thinking she could bury Beatrice's truth, but she'd only exposed her own fear. I walked toward the Glassworks, its furnace a faint glow in the distance. Helen Reed would need every piece, Arthur's story, the notarized note, the prescription, and now this contract. Evelyn's suit was a desperate move, but her attack on the sculpture was a mistake. I'd spent years at the Chronicle, reading people's tells, a glance too quick, a lie too smooth. Evelyn's desperation was her tell, and I'd use it. I wouldn't scream or falter. My fight was with evidence, not tears, and the courtroom would be my battlefield. The contract Clara gave me was a grenade, its ink proving Evelyn knew about Edward Callahan's claim to Hensley Glassworks. Her attempt to pry open the shattered beacon was a desperate act, but the courtroom was where I'd detonate her lies. The Fall River courthouse loomed, its stone facade as unyielding as my resolve. Inside, the air was thick with polished wood and tension, the gallery packed with townsfolk whispering about the Hensley sisters' feud. Evelyn sat across the room, her tailored suit a mask of control, but her fingers tapped a nervous rhythm. My lawyer, Helen Reed, stood beside me, her briefcase holding Arthur's testimony, the forged prescription, the notarized note, and Clara's contract. My mother, the woman who'd raised me, sat behind Evelyn, her face pale. My father, the man who stayed silent, was absent, his absence a final betrayal. Judge Ruth Carter's gavel struck, silencing the murmurs. Helen opened with my case, Evelyn's slander at the Maritime Glow Festival, her payment to Dr. Vance, and my mother's forged prescription. Each piece was a brick in the wall I'd built, but Evelyn's defamation suit against me loomed, her lawyer painting me as a reckless journalist smearing her sister. Then Helen called Clara Thompson to the stand. My childhood friend walked forward, her counsel badge dull under the courtroom's harsh light. She swore her oath, her voice steady but her eyes avoiding Evelyn's. "I took money from Evelyn to support her hotel deal," Clara said, her words slicing through the room. "She knew about Edward Callahan's claim and tried to bury it." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Clara produced the contract, its clause about Edward a damning spotlight on Evelyn's lies. Then, the courtroom doors swung open, and a man entered, tall, silver-haired, with eyes that mirrored Beatrice's in the old Glassworks photo. Edward Callahan. Whispers erupted, but Judge Carter's gavel silenced them. Helen had tracked him through Arthur's contacts, and now he stood, holding a fragile paper sealed in wax, Beatrice's Chuck, hidden inside the shattered beacon. "My mother left this for me," Edward said, his voice calm but resonant. "It names me co-owner of the Glassworks and Lila as its steward." My chest tightened. Beatrice hadn't just promised me the Glassworks in her letter, she'd entrusted me to protect her son's legacy. Edward's gaze met mine, a quiet alliance forged in shared betrayal. He turned to the judge. "Evelyn offered me money last year to renounce my claim. I refused." The gallery buzzed, but Evelyn's face was stone, her fingers still. Helen pressed Edward further, and he recounted Evelyn's visit to his Providence home, her offer cloaked in charm but laced with threats. Then came the blow that shook the room. "She admitted to damaging the shattered beacon," Edward said. "She said it hid a document that would ruin her plans." My breath caught. Clara's testimony had hinted at this, but Evelyn's own words, confessed to Edward, were a noose of her own making. The sculpture's cracks weren't just art, they were Beatrice's defiance, protecting a truth Evelyn couldn't destroy. Judge Carter's eyes narrowed, her pen scratching notes as the gallery leaned forward, hungry for more. I glanced at my mother, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. The woman who'd taught me to write truth had forged lies to protect Evelyn, erasing Edward to preserve a family facade. My father's absence stung, his silence a choice to let Evelyn's lies fester. Clara's testimony, Arthur's revelations, and now Edward's Chuck, they were my arsenal, built through years of chasing stories at the Chronicle. Evelyn's suit against me was crumbling, her lies exposed not by my anger but by the evidence I'd gathered. I scribbled in my notebook, "What makes a family hide their own blood to save face?" The question burned, but Edward's presence answered it. Truth, buried in glass, could outlast even the deepest betrayal. Helen closed our case. Her voice steady as she presented the deed check, its wax seal unbroken until today. Evelyn's lawyer faltered, his objections weak against the weight of Edward's testimony. Evelyn's eyes met mine, no longer smug but hollow, her control slipping like sand. The courtroom was my battleground, and I'd fought not with screams, but with precision, each piece of evidence a blow. My mother's gaze dropped, her complicity a wound I'd carry but not let break me. Clara's guilt, Edward's courage, Arthur's loyalty, they were my allies, proof that truth could reshape a family's lies. If you've ever faced a lie that threatened to erase you, how would you fight to reclaim your name? Subscribe to Follow My Battle, to see how a sister's deception shatters, and how justice rises from the ruins. Judge Carter's gavel fell like a hammer on glass, finalizing my victory. Evelyn's slander, her defamation suit, her hotel scheme, they shattered under the weight of Clara's contract, Arthur's testimony, and Edward Callahan's D-Chuck. The Fall River courtroom buzzed as spectators spilled out their whispers, carrying my name as a badge of truth. Evelyn sat motionless, her polished facade cracked, her eyes avoiding mine. My mother, the woman who'd raised me, slipped out quietly, her complicity a shadow she couldn't outrun. My father's absence was a wound that no verdict could heal. But the Glassworks was mine, and Beatrice's legacy, Edward's legacy, was safe. Yet, one truth lingered, gnawing at me. Evelyn's desperation ran deeper than greed. I returned to Hensley Glassworks, its furnace a low hum, the air thick with the scent of molten silica. The shattered beacon stood in the display room, its cracks glinting like a map of my fight. Helen Reed had warned me that Evelyn's loss didn't guarantee her surrender. As I traced the sculpture's etched EC, a voice broke the silence. Lila, you need to hear this. It was Sarah Klein, a retired glassblower who'd worked under Beatrice in the 60s. Her hands, gnarled from years at the furnace, clutched a small wooden box. She'd contacted Helen after the trial, insisting she had something to share. I couldn't come forward sooner, Sarah said, her voice steady but low. Evelyn scared me quiet. She opened the box, revealing a shard of glass, its edge etched with Beatrice's initials. This was from a vase Evelyn smashed in '98. Sarah said. One of Beatrice's last pieces, made for Edward. Evelyn said it was an accident, but I saw her do it, deliberately, in the workshop, after she found out it was meant for him. My breath caught. Evelyn hadn't just buried Edward's claim, she'd destroyed his mother's art to erase him. Entirely. Sarah's eyes met mine, fierce with regret. She broke 3 more that year, all with Edward's name etched on them. She wanted no trace of him left. The shard in my hand was heavy, its jagged edge a testament to Evelyn's ruthlessness. This wasn't just about the Glassworks, it was about wiping out a brother she'd never acknowledged. The revelation burned. My mother's forged prescription, my father's silence, Clara's wavering, they were pieces of a larger betrayal. But Evelyn's destruction of Beatrice's work was a calculated erasure. I remembered Evelyn's sketches as a teenager, always praised over mine, her charm masking a need to control. Sarah's testimony, if shared publicly, could bury Evelyn's reputation for good. I scribbled in my notebook, what makes a sister destroy her own family's art to hide the truth? The question lingered, but Sarah's shard was an answer, a relic of Evelyn's fear, her need to rewrite our family story. I walked to the workshop, where the furnace's glow cast long shadows. Clara had redeemed her betrayal with her testimony, and Edward's courage had turned the tide. My mother's role still stung, she'd protected Evelyn, forging my name to keep the facade intact. My father, the man who stayed silent, had let it happen, his absence at the trial a final cut. But Sarah's shard was a new weapon, proof of Evelyn's vendetta against Edward that went beyond words or contracts. I'd use it, not in court, but in the Chronicle, to ensure Fall River knew the cost of Evelyn's lies. Helen had already drafted a statement for the town council, ensuring the Glassworks would remain an artisan hub, not a hotel. Standing before the shattered beacon, I saw Beatrice's defiance in its cracks. Evelyn thought she could erase Edward, just as she'd tried to erase me. But the glass held firm, its truth unyielding. My mother's complicity, my father's passivity, Evelyn's destruction, they were a family's shame, but I'd turned their lies into my strength. The Glassworks wasn't just mine, it was Beatrice's, Edward's, and every artisan who'd shaped its legacy. I wouldn't let it fall. The Hensley Glassworks hummed with new life, its furnace aglow as artisans shaped molten glass under the rafters. I stood in the transformed workshop, now a community art center, its walls lined with sketches from Beatrice's journals, restored by Edward Callahan's steady hand. My victory in court had secured the Glassworks, but Sarah Klein's shard, the broken remnant of Evelyn's attempt to erase Edward, had shifted Fall River's heart. My Chronicle article, detailing Evelyn's destruction of Beatrice's art, spread like wildfire, turning whispers into roars. Evelyn's name, once a beacon of prestige, was now a cautionary tale, her hotel dreams buried under the weight of truth. My mother, the woman who'd raised me, had left town, her silence louder than any apology. My father, the man who stayed silent, sent a letter, brief, hollow, unread. Their absence was a scar, but the Glassworks was my healing. I walked to the Maritime Glow Festival's new site, where the shattered beacon stood as the centerpiece, its cracks illuminated by lanterns. The festival, once a stage for Evelyn's lies, had been a mask for our family's shame. I'd uncovered records in the Historical Society's archives, tucked in a dusty ledger. The Maritime Glow began as a cover, funded by my mother's allies, to distract from Edward's birth in 1948. Beatrice had agreed, hoping to protect her son, but it became a tool to bury him. Now, the festival honored truth, its lanterns casting light on Edward's story and Beatrice's legacy. The crowd gathered, their applause soft but steady as I unveiled a new glass piece, a phoenix, its wings etched with EC and LBH. My hands, steady from years at the Chronicle, placed it beside the shattered beacon, a symbol of rising from betrayal. Then, a woman approached, Ellen Marsh, a former festival organizer, her eyes sharp with memory. I helped. Your mother planned the first Maritime Glow, she said, her voice low. She insisted we never mention Edward, said it would ruin the family. My chest tightened. The festival wasn't just a distraction, it was my mother's design, a deliberate veil over Beatrice's truth. Ellen handed me a faded program from 1965, its cover featuring a glass lantern but no mention of Beatrice's work. I kept this, Ellen said. Your mother paid me to rewrite the festival's history, to erase Edward's name from every record. The program's edges were worn, but its truth was sharp. My mother hadn't just hidden Edward, she'd reshaped a town's tradition to protect Evelyn's shine. The revelation cut deep. My mother's forged prescription, my father's passivity, Evelyn's broken vases, they were all part of a legacy built on erasure. But Ellen's confession was the final piece, proof that the Maritime Glow was a lie, woven into Fall River's fabric. I scribbled in my notebook, what makes a family rewrite history to bury their own? The question lingered, but the phoenix beside the shattered beacon answered it. Truth, forged in fire, could outlast any deception. Clara Thompson, now a vocal ally, helped me draft a council proposal to make the festival a permanent tribute to Beatrice and Edward. Arthur Gibbs and Sarah Klein, their hands weathered by glass, taught classes in the new art center, their stories keeping Beatrice's spirit alive. I stood before the crowd, my voice steady. This festival once hid a family's shame, I said, holding up the 1965 program. Now, it lights the truth. The lanterns flared, their glow a defiance of the lies my mother crafted. Evelyn's fall wasn't my triumph, it was the Glassworks' rebirth, a place where artisans like Edward could create without fear. My fight wasn't just for me, it was for every name erased, every legacy stolen. If you've ever been silenced by those you trusted, how would you rewrite their lies to reclaim your truth? Looking back, I see the battlefield clearly, a notarized note, a forged prescription, a contract, a deed check, a broken shard. Each was a step through betrayal, my mother's favoritism, my father's silence, Evelyn's manipulation. I didn't scream or break. I fought with evidence, with the precision of a journalist who'd learned to read lies in a glance, a pause, a smudged signature. The lesson isn't about forgiveness or revenge, it's colder, truer. Family can wound you deepest, but lies are fragile when you hold the truth. For those of you facing injustice in your own families, don't wait for their remorse. Gather your proof, stand firm, and build something new from the ruins. Your strength isn't in their approval, it's in the legacy you choose to shape. I'm Lila Hensley, and I've walked through fire to stand here. If you found strength in my story, join me for the next chapter, subscribe to support the series, and let's keep shining light on the truth.